What's people's beef with dividend investing? I can see how people may want to avoid or steer away from it. If you're trying to accumulate and invest $1 plus mil in either your retirement or taxable brokerage account, chances are it'll take you a long time to reach your living off dividends dream by generating $30,000, $40,000, or $50,000 plus in annual dividends. I think that's a pipe dream for the average person, and that they'll see their dreams come true when they're already in their deathbeds. So, what if we approach this concept in a more practical manner? What if one would like to generate between just $5,000, $10,000 in annual dividends? I believe it's attainable, pending the individual's circumstances and how consistent and committed they are to reach that goal. And I think $5,000, $10,000 a year would cover most essential necessities in life. Please let me know if that's feasible for the average person. Thank you. Edit, I guess I should have been clear from the beginning. I don't think chasing after the dividend for a large payout is ideal, but should be part of smaller allocation of your overall portfolio. So, yes, to live solely on $5,000, $10,000 just to cover essential necessities is illogical and asinine from a long-term investing perspective. There is nothing inherently bad about dividend investing, as long as you understand how it works, the tax implications in your country, and what you rightly point out, one's personal goals. Conversations frequently end up polarizing people for or against dividend stocks, but that's the nature of social media. And, amazingly, you don't have to invest only in one thing. I hold both volatile growth prospect and mature, stable dividend companies as investments. Shocker, or even one asset class for that matter. It's more than stocks. It can be ETFs or actual bonds, commodity ETF, stocks, real estate, etc., etc. I'll add that a whole lot of people just don't get it. The dividend sub is full of people that freak out about the idea of selling even small amounts of their principal, as if generating 4% dividends and no growth is somehow this completely different thing than having your principal grow by 4% and then selling the gain. You can explain to them that, well, those actually work out to be exactly the same thing, and they'll go, but in the growth case I now have fewer shares and I'll eventually run out of them. And you'll say, no, that's not how it works, and the number of shares is irrelevant. All that actually matters is the total dollar value of your portfolio. And then they'll either say something else inane because they don't understand math, or they'll just turn to insults. I eventually had to unsubscribe because, at least last I looked, it had been completely taken over by the true believers who think ever having to sell principal is of the devil. Edit. Oh, and I forgot that all I care about is the dividends, even if my shares are going down, people. Tons of them seem to think it's perfectly fine to be pulling 8% dividends as the stock drops 15% a year, and genuinely prefer that to the idea of pulling in 10% growth with no dividends. Remove. The day they learn why the stock goes down each quarter on X dividend will be quite the shocker. I think in a perfect world, where stocks are perfectly priced, you are right. But in the real world, I don't believe they are the same. TLDR, dividends are more advantageous when share prices are lower. Dividends rely on business fundamentals where the actual cash flows of the company matter. Getting the same money from selling relies on market sentiment where the fundamentals play a role, but speculation can have a large impact. If sentiment is positive, you can sell at an elevated price, the VGR. If sentiment is bad, you sell at a disadvantaged price. For instance, say you bought a share of stock ABC at $100 a year ago, and now the fair price of stock ABC is still $100. In a perfect world, a one-time 5% dividend payout would result in $95 of value afterwards, and you retain one share. Let's say the fundamentals of the business stay the same for 1 year. So the price stays at $95 and you sell. You retained all your money now, same scenario where you bought a $100 share a year ago, but in non-perfect world, there is news of an impending lawsuit that is overblown and the stock price is down 20% as a result. You get the same $5 dividend, 5% of original value, which results in a drop to $75. When the news blows over a year later and the stock returns to fair value, you sell for $95. Same result. Now, let's say you didn't receive a dividend and instead sold $5 during the downturn. When the market returns to fair value and you sell the rest, you only get $93.75. You are down 1.25%, and compared to the other scenarios. The opposite could be said for a bull market where selling would be advantageous, But anyone can sell in a bull market whether you collect dividends or not. The only thing you've successfully argued is that dividends could have less variance than the stock price itself. It has nothing to do with the actual share price. Or are you saying that a $100 share of some stock would be more advantageous as a dividend stock after doing a 1-to-100 split? I think you guys might be talking past each other. The fact that divs have less volume than price is what makes receiving dividends less risky than periodically selling principal. I'm not saying I agree, I'm just explaining this guy's position. Personally, I avoid dividends as I'm accumulating and trying to avoid taxable income. I agree that we are probably talking past each other. My fundamental argument is that different things drive each return to investors. For dividends, business output is the driving force that allows for it to happen. For selling, fundamentals plus speculation drive price. Both fundamentals and speculation can both swing from time to time, which can impact each type of return to investors. Yes, but that's not something specific, exclusive to divs. You can just find regular stock with lower volume. Maybe I'm misunderstanding your point, but I don't think that's right. Or at least he isn't helpful. I would think that the overwhelming majority of the time, like greater than 99% of the time, a given stock's divs will be less volatile than its price. It's kind of meaningless to compare the volatility of one stock's divs to another stock's price volume. And it seems irrelevant to point out that different stocks have different price volatilities. We're not, at least I'm not, maybe I'm misunderstanding the other commenter, talking about volume of price versus div amount. We're talking about volume of total returns of div stocks versus non-div stocks. If you are after a portfolio with less risk, just target that explicitly instead of targeting div stocks. I'm arguing that there's no reason to explicitly consider whether a stock is a div stock or not. Got it. I think the original was pointing out that the volume of price vs volume of div AMT affecting you negatively if you need to sell at defined times rather than relying on distributions, not total div AMT. I agree with your general point though, absent tax optimization, in which case I would argue avoiding divs in certain situations. That still doesn't make any sense. You're comparing apples to oranges. If you want a fixed div, then just sell shares until you get the same monthly income every time. The fixed div amount still represents a larger portion of the stock value when the div stock plummets. If you're noting that the div is essentially equivalent to a forced sale, and price drops exactly in accord with the div, you'd be right. I suppose the only real benefit, assuming similar return profiles, there are people that genuinely believe dividend stocks may outperform in the long run, is a psychological one since you still have the same number of shares after the div, which is meaningless since their value is lower, which makes receiving a dividend easier than periodically selling. IGU. That's what I'm saying is I fully agree with you. An agreement wins yet again, smiley face. Glad that we're on the same page and that I wasn't also misunderstanding you. You assumed that the dividend stock went from $75 to $95, a 27% increase. Whereas the non-dividend stock went from $80 to $100, a 25% increase. So of course the dividend stock performed better. You literally assumed it would. And I know you'll argue, well, that's the fair value in both cases. But the point is that implies that the greater cash reserves of the non-dividend paying company gave them literally zero benefit during this time period. Why assume that? The whole point of a company not paying dividends is the assumption that they're investing the cash into their own growth. Shouldn't they have gone up in fair value compared to the other company? You've essentially said, let's assume that the dividend company keeps paying its dividend like clockwork, but the growth company doesn't actually grow. And, yes, in that invented scenario, no wonder the dividend stock performs better. And, of course, I'm aware that you could argue that this happened over such a short time area that growth isn't relevant, in which case you could flip the results simply by assuming that the stock goes up at first due to some news rather than down, causing the dividend stock to perform worse than the growth stock. Dividend stocks do not inherently perform better than growth stocks, no matter how many invented scenarios we imagine. For every scenario where the dividend stock performs better, there's an opposite scenario where the growth stock performs better. I am illustrating a point that they are not the same. In order to show the math, of course I have to create a case out of thin air. That said, I am making a couple of assumptions that I think are reasonable. 1. Company fundamentals drive price over the long term. 2. I am saying it distributes a single dividend at a market price low. 3. Assuming company output remains the same over the time period. Companies waste money all the time and spend money on things that don't create any shareholder value, so this is not uncommon. I am not saying one is better than the other, but that they are not the same as stated. There are a couple of reasons why I think they are different. 1. Dividends can be tax disadvantaged or advantaged based on your income or account type. 2. Dividends do not need to be timed by market price. Shareholder value is incrementally returned to the investor over time versus waiting for the right moment to sell. They also don't realize that 5% isn't fixed. Dividends can easily be cut at any given time. In fact, they frequently are. Remove. It is fundamentally a 19th century attitude, the extreme worship of capital over income. You'd have English people sitting on fortunes in the thousands or tens of thousands of pounds, living solely off the dividends, income, and economizing to no end to accomplish this. On one hand, it's a lunatic attitude to design an entire way of life around never selling any capital, ever, and trying to reinvest as much as the dividend, income from the capital as possible, even if it means your total net worth. It might be something like 100 years of average wages and you're living barely better than a laborer. On the other hand, this attitude did at least force people to focus on the future and investing for the long, multi-generational term. Today, our largest investment over our lifetimes is education, which, in theory, is a large increase in COL and lifetime earnings, but requires constant reinvestment every generation. I think a lot of the dividend nut bars are reaching for something between EAC. A generation forever must invest $100K, inflation adjusted, between 18 to 24 just to get a middle-class life, and insane worship of capital. The problem is they are often overcorrecting and forgetting that we have different options available to us investing wise and more legal protections than existed in, say, 1830. Wow, I am that person you described, and this was an amazing explanation for me. Simple and address my exact beliefs law. Greater than, but in the growth case I now have fewer shares and I'll eventually run out of them. Having flashbacks to when I ended up arguing about this with them in the dividend sub and they kept saying stupid things like this. They genuinely have no idea how it works. You have to think in the long run here. If you sell your stocks, you won't be getting dividends from them. That's why people freak out when talking about selling. And if the price drops in a good company, you buy more and 10 years from now, that price drop would be completely forgotten and you'll have even more shares from which you will be getting even more dividends. That's why people don't care if the price drops today, because in 10 or 20 years that won't matter. Obviously, you have to compare apples to apples. Selling 4% of your stock is equivalent to receiving a 4% dividend and not reinvesting it. Clearly, that isn't something you do while still in the accumulation phase, but at the end when you're trying to live off of it. And yes, obviously you should focus on long-term performance, but I'm talking about people who have lost 50% of their principal during an up market while receiving much less than that in dividends, who seem to think they're doing fine. Because, hey, free money every month. You know, the sort of people who think QYLD has been a good buy. Your issues with dividend investors seem more psychological than mathematical. Who cares what other people do with their money? Some people love dividends, and over the long term, those people have done very well. I don't care in the slightest what they do with their money. And as I said, I simply unsubscribed from the subreddit when I became sufficiently annoyed by their idiocy. I think you're overestimating my level of emotional involvement here. I was merely reminded of it and felt like typing up a brief rant to share with the generally more intelligent crowd in this subreddit, and I don't care at all beyond that. QYLD has been a solid buy since inception, and fairly inexpensive to mitigate the loss of capital. You sound invested. QYLD certainly isn't the worst buy you could have made, but you'd have been far better off just investing in the S&P 500 even before considering tax drag. And I'm not sure what "you sound invested" is supposed to mean. I'm doing the exact same thing as you are, wasting time on Reddit. What makes you think I'm any more invested in this than you or anyone else here? I don't give the slightest shit what you invest in. The hostility is usually a tell. So why the discouragement for buying Quiled? There is an active Redditor with over 100,000 Quiled shares. He is doing fine. It's not QQQY. What hostility? It's easy to misread tone over text. I don't know what I said that sounded hostile, but I assure you it wasn't intended to. And you could have bought all sorts of underperforming investments and still be doing fine. I'm not arguing that people investing in QYLD are not making money, merely that they've significantly underperformed the market. Most don't understand how it works. Greater than, and I think $5,000, $10,000 a year would cover most essential necessities in life. Air. What? I think the issue here is that people think dividends are free money, and people who pursue them don't totally understand why dividends aren't all that great. I must live in Thailand, because here in the US $10,000 is less than my food budget lol. Forget insurance, healthcare, etc. I think they are talking from a retired person's perspective or someone financially stable. 10K in cash obviously won't cover rent, but if your house is paid for, it would pay for a lot of your petty expenses and bills annually. My property taxes on my paid-off house is $8,000. Insurance is almost $2,000. Guess I'll be eating sheetrock if I have only $10,000 a year income. I'll bet your insurance would go up once you eat all the sheetrock. What state do you live in? My taxes are similar for my condo in the Chicago suburbs. I think it really depends on what state of life you are in and where you live. My uncle's in Tennessee has a newer single-family home and 5 acres around Knoxville and pays like $500 in property tax a year. Washington. Property taxes LMAO. Sucks to suck, I guess. My property taxes are $4,000 and my insurance is $1,500. Yeah, my rental is about that. Yep, same here. Paid off house $8 to $9K annual prop taxes. Texas. Sure, I get what they're saying, but even if you own your house, there are expenses like insurance and tax. Then there's food and healthcare and whatever else that makes $10,000 unrealistic in the US. Maybe like $10,000 on top of Social Security of $35,000 would be decent. Deleted. Except those dividends are also being drawn from your investments. They aren't free money, they are the value of the stocks going down. So it's more just forced withdrawing of your stocks instead of the stocks giving you money. I'm a fan of dividend investing to a degree. Most of my Roth IRA is in dividends BC of tax adva. But the 4% rule assumes average growth. Most dividend-paying stocks aren't better than average. If anything, the total return matches average. So you could draw 4% div percent, not 4% plus div percent. A benefit of dividends is you don't have to liquidate the equities. But it isn't a cheat for better returns. The 4% rule includes any dividends. They're not a bonus. I'm retired. No debt, and I escrow about that much a year for property taxes, car and house insurance, and an LTC policy. It pays the big annual and semi-annual bills. Doesn't touch any actual living expenses, like the power bill. I live in Thailand and $10,000 doesn't go very far. Might cover rent outside of Bangkok. Other than that, tough. Has the cost of living increased that much? In 2012, I had a 35th floor furnished condo in BKK for $600 per mo on the river. 10 minutes walk to BTS. Rooftop infinity pool and gym, internet included. I was living on $1,200 to $1,500, very easy. At the higher end of your range, the cost is already $18,000. You can certainly get small condo around Bangkok for $600, but with utilities could cost $100 on top of that. That leaves $20 minus $30 per day for food and everything else. If you are retired, don't need to travel, and don't have medical expenses, you could do it. Costs have gone up though, and it seems tight to me. I suppose it shouldn't be surprising after 2020. Back then, my $1,200 to $1,500 mo included eating out for 90% of the meals. Uber, taxis, trains, travel, entertainment, and 2 or 3 massages weekly. I wasn't sacrificing by any means. Chiang Mai was, of course, even cheaper. Greater than. Has the cost of living increased that much? Yes. A lot of Reddit doesn't know much outside of their mama's basement, but just repeats popular talking points. Lol, agreed. 10K covers 1 month of living for my family of 5. Wow, 10K is about 5 months for me. You have any kids? If it were just the wife and I, we could like on half easily. You have a family of 5? Rent, insurance, etc. You're spending way too much money if you need $120,000 a year just for living expenses for a family of 5. That's a you problem, not a living expenses problem. Lots depends on where you live and what their situation is. That could be $4 minus 5K, and just daycare pretty easily with 3 kids. Dude, you guys are all on crack. $120K per year is not even remotely possible covering A5 in New York or parts of California or so many other places in the country. If my family made $120K per year where we live, we would be on the street. Down south, you can easily live off of $75,000 a year. Call is way cheaper in the Midwest and South. And that's why California population is dropping, haha. And yet tens of millions of immigrants do it. Before taxes? Yes, that's tight in NYC or the SF Bay Area. But $120,000 after taxes? Come on, that should go a long way even in expensive places. I have 3 kids. Just did a rough estimate and we spend at least $75K annually on necessities. Car ends, health ends, daycare, rent, utilities, food. That doesn't include other bills like credit card, student loans, MISC expenses. $120,000 for a family of 5, at least in my area of the country, would be really tight. You're also a family of 5. The other family is spending 60% more than you on those expenses. Greater than that's a you problem. Damn. Reddit misinformation and juvenile resentment. That's great you are able to diagnose how much this individual should spend on his family of 5 based on nothing more than a post. Just because you think it's too much or you could do it cheaper has no bearing on reality. Deleted. $300 a week for my family of 4. 52 times $300 equals $15,600. Damn, $300 per W is steep. More than double my budget for 4. We eat pretty healthy though. My kid's blueberry budget is killing me. Cold sweat smile, I wouldn't say we are splurging. $300 includes household items, detergent, soaps, paper towels, etc. We eat home-cooked dinner almost every night. Both me and wife work from home and eat lunch at home. Pack 2 kids' school lunches 5 days a week. Eat fairly healthily and the fridge is empty by the end of the week. Pretty little waste. Person shrugging. Do you live in a high cost of living area? Your schedule there matches almost exactly. Tube steak? $2K a year on steak, and with a decent cut of steak being $10-ish a pound. That means your steaks are 7 ounces of cheap junk cuts every time you eat. Legit, I must spend $100 a week on groceries. That's $5,200 a year. Eating steak and seafood every day for $50 a week sounds like you're renting out your box for $1. Deleted. https://vincentsmeatmarket.com/product/vincents-steak-sampler-2/this one. 1X Prime Dry Aged Porterhouse, 32 ounces. 1X Prime Dry Aged Bone Iodine Mononitride NY Strip, 16 ounces. 1X USDA Prime Dry Aged Bone Iodine Mononitride Ribeye, 16 ounces. 1X USDA Prime Black Angus Filet Mignon, 8 ounces. So 2 pounds of porter, 1 pound of NY Strip, 1 pound of ribeye, and a half pound of filet mignon? 4.5 pounds, and that lasts you all month? What are you, a cockroach? That's 1 day with a fam of 4. Deleted. You eat 1 bagel for breakfast? And 5 ounces steak for dinner? How much do you weigh? 'Cause I'm 5 feet 9 inches, 170 pounds, and I think even 1 pound steak per meal is small. Usually I go for 1.5 to 2 pounds per meal. Don't know how it's possible you're eating that little. You're seriously out here flexing about eating wholesale frozen meat and canned corn? Bro, their beef box is around 164 ounces of meat. Only a third of that is actual steak, and of that only half is good steak. So say you only eat 8 ounces of beef a day and eat beef every other day, you'd need to order 10 beef boxes a year, which would come out to around $1,250 based on their website. The seafood cost even more, but say it's equal, that comes up to a total of $2,500 per year just for the protein of 1 meal a day. I assume you buy potatoes or other fruits, vegetables, and also probably eat more than a meal a day. Also probably eat more than 8 ounces of beef a meal. So I think you're spending a lot more than you said you do. As for your question, I spend around $1,200 per month total on food for my wife and I. But we order out every day for dinner and cook lunch, breakfast. Did you just say the phrase beef box to me? Deleted. You sound hungry as fuck, dude. Go eat a Snickers. You may want to check your math then. Even if you were eating a cheap $8 to $10 sirloin and the cheapest fish you could buy, then that $70 a week on your protein comes out to $3,640 over 52 weeks. That's with no sides and no other meals or food throughout your day. So assuming you eat more than just a $8 to $10 single piece of protein once a day, I think you need to revisit how much you are actually spending on food. Edit. Even if you are buying significantly in bulk at Costco or something, there's a way you're spending a total of around $5 per day by 7 days a week total for all your food. Greater than even if you were eating a cheap $8 to $10 sirloin and the cheapest fish you could buy, then that $70 a week on your protein comes out to $3,640 over 52 weeks. We're finally getting to answering the OP's question about people's beef. Deleted. Does the beef box come with crayons, or would I have to get those separately at ShopRite? Depends where you live. In a country like Lithuania, $10K US goes a really long way to financial security and retirement. Lithuania has a GDP per capita of $25,000, and that's including village life. How much can a banana be, Michael? $10? Depending on the country, it is enough. Where I live, 5,000 United States dollars per year is minimum wage. Not exactly cover expenses well, but you will be able to live. Aren't dividends just a taxed income based off of an ownership portion? What do you mean by free money? I'd love to hear this one. And why are dividends not that great? Would you rather companies piss that money away in more bonuses for CEOs? No, but those aren't the only two choices. If I own stock in the company, I would rather they invest that money in growing the business, not in paying shareholders. So you think these CEOs are better at spending your cut than you are? Got it. No, I think I'll make more money in the long run if the business isn't consistently dropping its stock price on purpose in order to pay shareholders. The drop is temporary if the company is a good investment. That makes no sense. Especially since the stock can drop regardless for any reason. I'd take a dividend any day over betting on a company's stock price to consistently go up for X amount of years and the CEO's making the right decision every time when investing the profits. Why dividends aren't great at all? What? Did you forget to add the S to the end of that sarcasm? No, but that's also not what I said either. I'm not against dividends. I just think people need to take a realistic view of what they are and what they aren't. Main beef is people's illusion that dividend equals safer equals better than all other investments that do not focus on dividend. Dividend should be counted alongside with growth of share price for total growth. Take that and compare to the risk X. HSBC paying 7% dividend famously in Hong Kong for many YRS does not mean they are better than a stock growing at 7% a year. Ignore local tax treatment for a sec. Many older gen always advise to buy HSBC and chill. Well, take a look at their stock in last 10 years. Yes. Athene even announced stop dividend, so if you thought it was a safer investment inherently, you would be completely fucked if that's your retirement plan. Companies give dividend for different reasons. Some because they don't do much with capital and can't really grow it more aggressively, so they just give it to you. Some do it to scam you. Check out all those ETFs promising 15% dividend. If you want to do dividend because you have a theory or preference on a specific side of market and just so happen to give you dividend, then so be it. But if you are saying, my 1 mil portfolio is better in dividend stocks than VU, then you are probably objectively wrong, or at least has a false sense of security. Dividends companies also signal that they are at their maturity and aren't going to be making risky plays for insane attempts at growth. I think the fact that the last 20 to 30 years there has been tech boom makes people undervalue the idea that some companies hit a point where they say, we're in a good place. We're going to optimize and keep ourselves going and pay out dividends. Financially, obviously, dividends payments take out a sum out of the company's worth, but general companies that enter dividends should be in a place where their valuation is more stable over time. Honestly, do you really want Coca-Cola innovating? You don't want to add Coke? Coca-Cola execs watched Succession and pivoted to tech to get those juicy 10 to 30p. New flavor, Coke with Coke. Get fat but also energized, so you work off the fat. Isn't that the original flavor? Trends do come in cycles. New Coke? New Coke was introduced to disguise the switch from sugar to high fructose corn syrup. Even when they went back to classic Coke, the corn syrup remained. How about some Pepsi Coke? When I went to the Coke Museum in GUT, everything was called Coke, even if it was another brand. That's a Southern thing. No kidding. In LA, it's all about the cold drinks. A company can pay dividends for literally a century and then completely blow up. Just ask GE shareholders. Dividends investing is stock picking. Stock picking is gambling with extra steps. Coca-Cola must be innovative as a business. It's literally going to the moon. In the last 10 years, it's up plus 1,000%. Its 3% dividend is a rounding error on those gains. Edit. NASDAQ. Coke, the bottling company, https://www.nasdaq.com/fr/market-activity/stocks/coke/advanced-charting. I'm not saying a company is by default safer because it's paying dividends. But by auto-paying their profits to their stockholders, they are signaling something to you by not having that money available to reinvest into themselves. It's a strategic shift in your position in the market. They are also signaling that they are too stupid to do the better route for their shareholders and just buy back their stock. Instead, they are forcing me to pay higher taxes as a time of their choosing on my investment returns. Co is up 70% in the last 10 years. It has returned more cash by dividends than by share price appreciation. You are right that the underlying business must be well shaped, but in that case I do not see the point that it matters how the capital is returned to shareholders. So, by the way, are you arguing that growth investing is not stock picking at all? Total return investing isn't stock picking, gambling. You can just buy the whole casino by buying low-fee ETF and buy all of the stocks. I mean, GE Innovation was basically becoming a bank, using mark-to-market accounting and failing to have any oversight. Hardly the best choice of an appliance company finding its place and settling in. Maybe something like IBM would be a better choice. Coca-Cola innovated a lot. They sell hundreds of different brands of products. Yes, I do want Coca-Cola innovating. That's what I expect out of all the companies I invest in. Then you should prefer the value, profitability, and investment factors, rather than just targeting dividends in and of themselves. You could do that with Avantis and DFA funds. Coca-Cola innovate all the time. With what? Bottled water? Sugary drink with caffeine number 1,203,434? Another hydration drink? Yes, all that and more. That's how I see it. Investing in stable dividend-paying companies is making your money work for you, quite literally. Investing in growth stocks is more speculative in nature. I like dividends if only for the fact that I can hold these companies long-term and see my cost EVG go down quarterly. It depends on your goals and life stage. A dividend portfolio will most likely have a lower beta and will be safer for those closer to retirement. Isn't it theoretically better to de-risk by buying a combination of the market index and the risk-free rate? You should be able to construct a portfolio with the same risk and higher expected return compared to 100% dividend basket. Assuming interest rates aren't at zero and you're taking asymmetric interest rate risk. I only just retired, but I was buying dividend stocks all my life. Okay. It's a reasonable choice throughout your investment cycle. And there's the thing that in the US, if a company doesn't see a good place to invest right now, it's better for the stockholders if the company buys back its stock. It allows the stockholders to decide when to realize the gain. Meanwhile, it can keep compounding tax-free, and capital gains is much lower. Sorry, dividends have zero redeeming property other than that some investors find them psychologically safer, for which the right move is to learn more about it, and if that fails, consult a psychologist. Tell that to Warren Buffett, one of the most successful investors of our time. His portfolio is around 60% in dividend stocks and has been. He regularly talks about boring, stable companies that pay out a consistent dividend. I'm all for boring and stable, but why would I want to create more taxable events? Greater than I want a yellow car. Greater than why? Greater than because yellow cars are faster. Greater than no, they aren't. That's not how this works. Greater than OMG, why do you hate yellow cars? This is usually how these dividend conversations go. There's nothing particularly wrong with dividends or yellow cars, but there's nothing particularly right with them either. Focusing on them like there's something important to seek out is demonstrating a lack of understanding. And no, the 5 to 10K is nowhere near enough to cover necessities. At least in the United States. This is a great analogy. Dividends seems like a crude proxy for low growth but established, consistently profitable companies, which is a completely valid strategy for certain investment goals. But the actual fundamental goals have to be understood, because dividends alone also include crappy, shrinking dividend traps, and limit diversification by excluding otherwise great companies that just happen to do buybacks or have growth opportunities. BRK comes to mind. Well diversified. Lots of insurance, which is like the poster child for boring profit. Sitting on epic piles of money. But no dividends. Seems like a silly reason to avoid them. Though I guess at this point, they own so much AAPL that they don't really behave like a boring dividend stock either. Buybacks and splits don't add value to stocks either. Shares have value for two reasons. 1. Current asset value. 2. Current value of future profits. Buybacks don't really do anything for the former. Because I own X% of this company, which has $10 billion on hand, and I own Y% of this company, which no longer has $10 billion on hand because they used it eliminating shares to make my percent ownership higher, work out to the same valuation on the company itself. However, the way in which they do add value is that those future profits are now dividend among fewer shares. Anti-buyback derangement is common among people who don't understand finance. I've noticed. And I don't just mean people who are anti-capitalist and think all profit is evil. It's amazingly common to see people on financial subs spreading this conspiracist idea that returning value to shareholders via dividends is good, honest mom and pop capitalism. But returning value to shareholders via buybacks is shady, corrupt capitalism. I'd suggest stripping out whatever sources are misinforming you as these types of spaces often lead to poor investing decisions, like when a bunch of Redditors put their life savings into meme stock pump and dumps. Perhaps value goes up over time after a buyback. However, when it happens, it's a zero-sum game, much like splits. I'm not against either. I'm just stating a fact that it doesn't make the value of a stock go up or down when a split or buyback occurs. When you have 9 billion shares outstanding, buying back 1 million shares doesn't make a dent in the stock price. To make an impact, you'd have to buy back 1 billion shares, and that's not going to happen. It's all a shell game, in my opinion. The OML people you are fooling are those who are new, ignorant, or really don't care either way. Splits and buybacks have nothing to do with each other, aside from both being in the category of they are things the company can do with its stock. You are also wrong that it doesn't make value go up. Obviously, it's impossible to point to a price graph and say exactly what movements are caused by what. But it's elementary to show that removing shares instantly increases EPS, so holding P/E constant, P rises. I don't even know what to make of if there's a lot of shares then a small buy back would be small argument. Like, yes, and if a company paid out a dividend of 1 cent, that would be a small dividend. Your point? Buybacks definitely do. Reduce hash of shares, reduce PE. Really? Please provide some examples of where buybacks brought the stock price up. I'm not talking about a year later, either. Sometime within 6 months or less. How many shares were outstanding before the buyback? How many shares were bought back? And how much the buyback brought the value up? Are you sure it was not an organic increase and not just a perceived increase? I think this is the best explanation. A lot of the things people say they like about dividend stocks are better explained by other factors. It's like the person actually likes that the car has a fast 0 to 60 time, but they instead focus on the fact that it's yellow. They might accidentally buy a yellow car with a slow 0 to 60 time. Instead, they would be better served by just buying cars with fast 0 to 60 times regardless of the color. Yeah, every time I bring this up, someone takes it to mean I advocate only investing in tech, high-growth stocks. Because I must obviously hate dividends, and if I hate dividends, I must obviously only invest in high-growth stocks with astronomical PE. They then bring up stocks like Peloton and GoPro and say what risky bets they are, and they do not always pan out to prove that dividend stocks are better. No, I advocate investing in broad market index funds what do contain plenty of dividend pay. In stocks, I do not advocate for trying to do growth or dividends or value. Waiting between growth and value seems like it could be worthwhile. Like 2021, Fed is like, we're about to jack up rates, which might be translated as F the debt-laden growth companies. Then in 2022, growth minus 34%, value minus 5%. Then the Fed is like, welp, I think we're done jacking rates for now. And in 2023, value plus 7%, growth plus 50%. So it feels like if you generally sat around 50 to 50, then shifted towards one or the other based on the prevailing winds, maybe you could do better. It's always 100x easier to say these things than do them though. So who knows? It's just floating in the back of my head. Dividend investing aside, your premise that the 5 to 10K a year covers most essential necessities in life is absurd. Just gotta buy a van and live down by the river. 5 to 10K will be all you ever need. All darn it. You joke, but I'm in the U.S. military, and that's what a lot of people are doing. We literally just had a new instruction put out authorizing people with active duty orders to live indefinitely on installation recreational RV sites. It is absurd, but it is actually viewed as a financially wise decision to live in a van down by the river, harbor, in today's economy. Unfortunately, the market is catching up based on the research I've done. In many military-heavy areas, RV parks are charging near PR. ICE is around 60% of the average rent in the area. Factor in the price of a newer RV. Many sites don't allow rigs older than 10 years and many don't allow vans or converts. And you are very likely not saving any money. The upside is you have your own home and don't have to get a roommate to barely afford a shitbox apartment. For reference, cheap RV sites in San Diego charge about $1,200 just for the site. So 5 to 10K realistically might make the payments on a cheap RV. Greater than it is absurd, but it is actually viewed as a financially wise decision to live in a van down by the river, harbor, in today's economy. This reads like an SNL skit, but here we are. Ultimately, the problem with the housing market is an intentional one, because it has been extremely financially rewarding for a large voting bloc. Increasingly, This will be replaced with a large lobbying block as boomers sell up to private equity. Van life worked as a loophole when it was a small hash of people doing it, but in case of a mass exodus, the same forces that made actual housing unaffordable will come after the vans, too. Cool story, Boris. Down by the river. That's the biggest problem right now. Uncertainty about future prices has blown many people's calculations into speculative territory. I guess if a person were living like a pauper, had debt-free assets like a home, transportation, and was in a very LCOL area with public benefits, this could work as a barista fire. Otherwise, property tax alone is eating too much of that for me, and my income-producing assets pull in as much as what I've mentioned. If I wanted to trade more growth away for yield, I could double or even triple that amount, and I'd still feel broke. Managing every cent, especially early on, can become rather tedious and will eat into some of that precious free time we seek. Yeah, op is either really dense or not accounting for anything that would be considered even remotely average. My property taxes alone are $8,000 for a median-priced home in my area. $8K? Ouch. I shouldn't complain as much, though I'm guessing you live in a much higher call location. I live in Vancouver, which is a very expensive city, and the taxes on my $800,000 condo are only like $1,500 per year. Suburbia is unsustainable everywhere, and eventually the bill will come due no matter what kinds of shell games people try to play with it. That is incredibly low. I think a rundown, bungalow-style tiny home in my area would end up paying that much in taxes, likely more. I pay about 1.25% of my house's value in yearly taxes, and I might be being too generous on the value. I think it's technically HCOL now. Maybe like MHCOL. I'm outside of Austin. It's largely because we have no state income tax and lowish sales tax, so our property taxes are bigger in return. That's not the situation in my state. I always thought that area was interesting and one of the few remaining affordable metros to be found. May not be the case anymore, especially as suburban sprawl post-pandemic is driving up suburban prices back into near speculative territory in many places. When a significant percentage of houses are still selling for above asking with a near-peak interest rate period, that is not sustainable. Yep, exactly. We switched from the east side to the northwest side in 2019. Closed in December 2019 right before everything went nuts. $269K then, and by 2023 it's over $400K. Absolutely nuts increase in call these last 5 years. My friend recently sold a house where the property tax was $40K a year on 4 acres. He was so relieved to be rid of the house. The buyer had planned to flip it, but nobody was biting. It covers my golf expenses, so it looks like a valid statement. I wonder if they mean recurring household bills, e.g. phone, heating, internet, council tax, subscriptions. That'd come to around £5 to $10K a year, depending on the person. Generating dividend stock to match that would be a nice savings goal. I don't know what Op had in mind, and I agree with your sentiment. I guess the statement can be true if one moved to a lower cost of living country with free healthcare, say Portugal. But we are digressing, smiley face. If you've already paid off your mortgage and live in an LCOL area, that's totally within reason. No matter where you live, $416 a month is not enough to live on. That wouldn't even cover most people's food alone. It's just that there is nothing magical about dividends. Investing in dividends may or may not give you better returns versus just investing in broad market funds. Most people, including me, think one should focus on total return. There is no real reason to only rely on dividends. If you need cash flows, you can simply sell part of your portfolio. You could sell 1% your portfolio per quarter. As long as your average returns are higher than 4%, you are not going to lose principal, and you might be able to do this basically forever. This is even more prevalent in a high interest rate environment like right now. Why risk money on a dividend stock when you can get 5% no risk in a money market fund? Collecting $40,000 in dividends sounds okay, but not when you could have made $200,000 in an S&P index fund. You are not risking anything if you buy a dividend ETF that filters and kicks out companies that do not do well and will drop dividend. The idea that dividends is a risk is actually ridiculous, as it is actually more safe, as dividend-paying companies are usually boring, stable companies that do well and pay out consistently. Yes, you can make $200,000 in the long run, or what if that's not your goal? Everyone has a different goal in investing. Let's say you just retired and you have 1.5 mil your growth stocks and you are retiring. The market crashes and drops by 50%. Do you want to be taking out shares right now? Prob not. But you are retired, so you have to. In the same note, SCHD will give you roughly 13K every quarter with that amount. Even in a market downturn. If you check SCHD or similarly VYM, etc., you can see that it did not drop as much as VU during the COVID dip. So if you actually have to take out a larger amount for an emergency, you will lose less. However, if you are young in your 20s to 30s and you have 20 to 30 years to go, then this strategy doesn't make sense, as it's better to have more growth. It's not just one is better than the other because overall return. It's about where you are in life and how you want to base your strategy. The problem with Reddit is that it's filled with new investors in their 20s who only saw the tech boom and think all money in growth. Well, if you are retiring, you don't have much room for growth, and that's totally fine. Risk-adjusted, SPY has blown SPYD out of the water. It's also had lower volatility and less severe drawdowns in the short, medium, and long runs. You need to remember that in retirement, you don't take 100% of your money out in 1 year. The average bear market lasts 1 to 1.5 years and typically fully recovers in 2 to 3 years. Plus, the S&P has only had 2 negative years in a row only once in the last 50 years. I know a 90-year-old is still 80% invested in growth. A 4% withdrawal rate is standard when you are retired. It makes it even better when you're making 10% a year. Where did I say in retirement you need to take 100%? Point to exactly where. Withdrawing any point at a market dip is a loss. You know, a 90-year-old? So what? That doesn't make this strat the only strat. Some people want to have dividend ETFs that just drop money into their account. They prefer not to see any volatility, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You're 90 years old may be okay with a big downturn while someone else may not. It also makes sense to have a good amount in dividend stocks. Warren Buffett has 60% of his portfolio in dividend stocks since the beginning of his career. Is your 90-year-old better at investing than Warren Buffett? You are so black and white in your thinking because you want to be right. But there is no right and wrong in investing. Someone might be okay with 12% return and having less volatility, while someone else might prefer 20% return with more volatility. Grow up. I'm a partial dividend investor, majority XEQT, and growth investor with a secondary focus on dividend yields. Right now, I'm averaging a 5% yield on just dividends. That's ignoring the equity growth in my portfolio and the fact that all of my dividends are being reinvested, which is adding to my equity growth more than just my normal monthly contributions. Which is a bonus because given unstable employment in the last 5 years, having dividends means I can continue to grow my portfolio, even when I can't afford to make regular contributions to my investment accounts. Greater than right now, I'm averaging a 5% yield on just dividends. Dividend yield means nothing taken in a vacuum. It's possible to have a high dividend stock with zero negative price appreciation, meaning you are in fact losing money or staying relatively flat. Greater than having dividends means I can continue to grow my portfolio even when I can't afford to make regular contributions to my investment accounts. That is not really how it works, but is no different than non-dividend paying stocks. You could ALS. Have growth without contributing with any stock. Dividends are taxed very inefficiently. That's my beef with them. I prefer a fund that grows, rather than one that hands out money for the sake of handing out money. Aren't qualified dividends taxed like long-term capital gains? But don't you think it sucks to be put in a position where you're forced to incur a taxable event, even one at the lower long-term capital gains rate, once per quarter? Wouldn't it be nicer to be able to choose for yourself when you incur that taxable event? Greater than, but don't you think it sucks to be put in a position where you're forced to incur a taxable event? Typically when you make money, you pay taxes. That's how it works. If you're employed, you incur a taxable event every time you get your paycheck. That doesn't stop you from having a job, right? You don't have an option with your paycheck. You have to take the money and incur a taxable event. If you could have your money moved directly from your employer to an investment without incurring taxable event, that would be wonderful. In fact, that's exactly what makes tax-advantaged accounts such as 401 kiloseconds so desirable. If you could only take what you actually need and move everything else directly to investments, that would be the superior strategy for your paycheck. Just as it's the superior strategy for your investments. So you're saying never invest in a non-retirement account? Some people might want to invest money after they have maxed out their tax-advantaged accounts. I guess those people only buy non-dividend paying stocks to avoid forced tax events? I invest in non-tax advantage accounts once I've already maxed my tax-advantaged accounts. This has nothing to do with dividends or not. The point is just that when possible, it's better to choose when I incur a taxable event, like a stock buyback, versus having it determined for me, like a dividend. I don't really worry about which accounts hold which assets. It depends. If the goal is growth, then yes, I'd strongly prefer to choose when those distributions happen or don't happen. However, if the goal is income, and I'd be selling off assets and having the exact same amount of taxes per year, it wouldn't matter at all. If anything, I'd prefer the set and forget it strategy of just having cash show up in my brokerage account without needing to sell anything. Yeah, it would be much nicer to be in the position where I was the CEO or board member of every company I'm invested in and could allocate capital as I personally see fit. Unfortunately, those positions are few and far between. Looking at dividends in a black or white viewpoint is too narrow. No, I don't want my free cash flow dedicated to buybacks at the top of the cycle. Nor do I want them funding projects with a terrible IRR. Tax issues aren't amazing, but are far from the worst thing in the world, particularly given that most company managements are mediocre at best, and will all too frequently waste capital. Buffett has spoken about this at length if you're interested in delving further. So, personally, I don't think it sucks to be put in that position, especially if I'm investing in a company with set shareholder remuneration policies and I know exactly what I'm getting into with dividends. Particularly if you broaden your scope outside of the US and spend any time in emerging or frontier markets. If anyone's view is that dividends are 100% bad or 100% good, and that's as in-depth as they can go, they really shouldn't be handling their investments. What's the advantage of dividends over stock buybacks? With the buyback, the same money gets distributed to shareholders, but they get to decide when they want to cash out. In a vacuum, buybacks are better. And all things equal, I prefer them, as should anyone. But valuation matters, and there are times where a share price exceeds the fair value of the company. That likely makes shareholders happy, but buying back overvalued stock is not a prudent use of capital. If management was being honest, they'd acknowledge that. Unfortunately, boards are rewarded for any sort of shareholder return, regardless of whether it's responsible, and I've seen too many companies initiate buybacks at the top of a cycle to have share price go nowhere because it was overvalued to begin with. In that case, returning cash to shareholders or looking for another use for it would objectively to be a better use. Not to laud Buffett more, but he does buybacks right with Berkshire. He understands the fair value of the company and is honest that sometimes it's priced too high. Berkshire will only buy back stock when they feel valuation is cheap. Otherwise, it's just throwing money into the wind. Setting it up to drip avoids these taxes, no? Serious question, because I just started setting some stocks I own to do that. I don't own them for the dividends, that's just a bonus, but figured I'd set them up to auto-reinvest in hopes of saving taxes. Edit. Thanks for the downvotes. In hopes of savings taxes. It was just that. I'm not a dividends investor. It just so happens some parts of my portfolio pay grin. No, you're still taxed on dividends received. Whether you reinvest automatically or keep in cash has no bearing on that. Same for in Canada, I guess. I'm holding the stocks either way. Just thought it might help. Obviously didn't look into too hard. No. Dividends are taxable if invested in a taxable account, DRIP or not. Oof. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but if they're in a regular account, you're going to get taxed whenever a dividend is paid. So you're definitely going to have a taxable event for each dividend payment unless they're in a retirement account. Yes. And share price appreciation isn't taxed at all. Yes, unrealized gains aren't taxed. But what do you do if you have to realize those gains? There isn't anything to do other than just pay the IRS, right?